KUBE presentation was quite puzzling.
I get it, because his name is runic.
Yeah, well, now it's time to talk about something that has impacted many cities in the Midwest, including Detroit. And with that, we'd like to invite Anthony Moss on housing discrimination. Please give him a round of applause.
Your name is Clyde Ross. Mr. Ross, you just came back from World War II, you got married, had some kids, and you just bought a house. Now, your story is as normal as it gets. Heck, you're living the American dream. But there's one plot twist that I didn't tell you about. Mr. Ross, you're black. It's pretty shocking, I know. Welcome to the club. The reason that this is important is because Clyde Ross, due to his blackness, was redlined into the east side of Chicago. And you're probably wondering, at least some of you, what is redlining? Well, redlining is a form of housing discrimination in which people based on their background are put into certain communities with people just like them and then treated differently. In Clyde Ross's case, that meant that when his boiler went out, nobody was there to fix it. Now, this isn't something that only happens in the 1930s. This is something that happens today. In fact, according to this 2012 study, about 17% of African Americans are told about and shown 17% less houses when buying the house than white Americans. And in fact, this is something so important that when I told my grandpa I was going to be giving a speech on housing discrimination, his eyes lit up. This was something that clearly not a lot of people talk about, but it's something that affects a lot of African Americans today. And so the first of these effects can be seen in public school funding. Now, as you can imagine, public school funding is a pretty important part of every day-to-day life. And this display demonstrates that across any poverty decile, or that is to say, no matter how rich or how poor you are, white Americans receive more average funding per student than black Americans, as the white Americans are represented by the yellow and black Americans by the brown. And so, not only is this a superficial assessment of racism, but it also has incredible consequences. From these maps, we can tell that the coasts have the most concentrated amount of what they're showing. So in school district spending, we can see the coasts like New York and California have the highest concentration, and likewise in bachelor degree attainment. And so essentially what this is saying is that there's a direct correlation between public school spending and bachelor degree attainment. And I'm sure you can imagine how important it is to attain a bachelor degree. It's a gateway to life. So, with that being said, because African Americans are redlined into their own communities, it's easier to treat them differently. If all African Americans are essentially put in the same community, you can say, all right, this community's not going to get any money, and then this is how that happens. Of course, that's not the only way in which we can see housing discrimination have some effects. Another one is high rate loans, which, if you couldn't figure it out, it means it's a loan that has a high rate. Anyways, from this display, we can tell that even across the years, African Americans have to pay a higher percentage of high rate loans. So more African Americans are paying these high rate loans than any other race, and in fact, it's increasing. Now, this is made easier by the fact that they can take these communities with all African Americans and say, all right, let's increase the loan to that, and then that's going to happen right here. And so essentially what this does is it makes it much harder for African Americans to move up the socioeconomic ladder because they have to deal with not only less public school funding, but also these incredible high rate loans that are just holding them down. And the next place we can see housing discrimination rear its ugly head is in workplace racism. Because of redlining, African Americans essentially have to form their own communities. They're put into their own parts of the city and they have to form their own way of life, their own culture. And so as a result of this, we see things that have adverse effects in terms of the workplace. So, for example, I don't know a lot of white Jaleels anymore, but maybe they just disappeared or something. But we can tell that this has an effect because this demonstrates that when people have African American sounding names, they're going to receive fewer callbacks. So once again, this is not only compounding again. So because they're put into their own communities, they still have to face even more and more struggles. Just getting a job is harder for them. The final place in which we can see housing discrimination rear its ugly head again is in gentrification. So again, circling back to this common idea of African Americans being put into their own communities, they've developed their own way of life. So we can tell in 1939 they pretty much took up the entire east side of Chicago, as the red areas indicate an African-American majority. But in the 1990s to 2000, we can tell that that's been taken over by the yellow area, which is mostly white Americans. So essentially, we can tell that this happens in Oakland and San Francisco as well. When white Americans decide that the city's prime for taking over, that's what they do. So they jack up the rates and they pretty much move them out of their own communities. So you can tell that this isn't a very good thing, because all of a sudden their way of life has been destroyed and they're put on the streets having to look for new houses. But of course, there's nothing you can do for this. Essentially, what you can do to help solve housing discrimination centers around being educated. So if you're educated about your rights and other people's rights, you'll be able to go on to places like HUD.gov, where you can report housing discrimination. So being aware of your rights allows you to directly stop it from happening. Second of all, being aware of your rights allows you to be able to vote in an educated manner. So for example, Lyndon Johnson, he's an elected official obviously, he was able to sign the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So essentially, by being able to vote, you're able to put in officials like Lyndon Johnson, Barack Obama, whose administration had a strong fight against housing discrimination, to help stop housing discrimination. Well, Mr. Ross, I'd like to say I had a great time with you, and I hope you understand why your boiler isn't going to get fixed anytime soon. And in terms of fixing that boiler, good luck, have fun.